From the very first moment the signal was detected, the atmosphere inside the orbital telemetry center shifted into something that no scientific institution is ever prepared to admit publicly. An instinctive, visceral awareness that whatever we had intercepted was not just unusual, not just intriguing, but profoundly out of place in our understanding of the Moon, the solar system, and our own position in the universe. On December 2nd, 2025, at 0411 UTC, one of our deep orbit monitoring platforms captured a narrow band burst of energy emerging not from deep space, not from the direction of the Sun, not from an artificial satellite or a known communication relay, but from the far side of the Moon, the hemisphere permanently shielded from Earth, the hemisphere where no terrestrial signal can ever reach, and the hemisphere where, according to every map, every chart and every mission log humanity has ever produced, no active device should exist. The message was faint, barely piercing the noise floor, but it carried a structured rhythm, repeating intervals, consistent modulation, and a pattern so deliberate that it forced every analyst in the room to pause, rerun their calibration, and confront the same impossible thought. Something on the far side of the Moon was transmitting. The deeper they looked, the clearer the picture became. Hours earlier, an Object 1 we had classified, tracked and feared under the name R2. Sven had been observed skimming the lunar surface, darting across shadows and gravitational pockets with a precision no natural body could achieve. For months, Sven had behaved unpredictably, but never without purpose. It traced arcs that mimicked reconnaissance. It shifted brightness as if controlling its visibility. It executed course corrections without gravitational cause. And now, after vanishing behind the Moon's unlit horizon, it had left behind a new anomaly, a device, a structure, a mechanism of unknown design that had begun to emit a stream of energy so tightly encoded that it resembled the opening lines of a message too complex for us to decipher. The shock came not from the detection itself, but from how it was detected. Ground-based observatories saw nothing. They could not. The Moon blocks all terrestrial reception. Only spaceborne monitors platforms positioned far beyond the Moon's orbital plane caught the signal as it bent around lunar curvature. And once the first burst was confirmed, 3 independent monitors verified the source within minutes. There was no confusion, no atmospheric distortion, no chance alignment. Something physically present on the far side of the Moon had powered on. Something that had not been there before. Something that R2 Sven had delivered, installed, activated, or perhaps awakened. And as analysts lined up the timestamps of the emission with the last recorded telemetry of Sven's descent, the sequence of events became unmistakable. Sven did not approach the Moon as a wanderer. It approached with intent. It did not orbit aimlessly. It executed a controlled pass. It did not drift into darkness. It entered it, and whatever it left behind began transmitting not randomly, not broadly, but along a vector that pointed not to Earth, not into empty space, but toward a region of the sky that matched the outbound trajectories of both R2 Sven and the earlier probe known as 3I Atlas. This was not noise. This was part of a chain. The implications were immediate and devastating. Humanity had long feared contact. It had long speculated about surveillance, reconnaissance, visitation, but never, not in the most imaginative scenarios, not in the darkest classified briefings, had we prepared for the possibility that an extraterrestrial mechanism could plant a device on our own Moon without warning, without resistance, and without even acknowledging that we existed. And yet that is exactly what the data now indicated. A foreign instrument was active on the far side of the Moon, transmitting at regular intervals, emitting energy with no known terrestrial origin, and behaving with a stability that suggested it was not merely operational, it was functioning exactly as intended. What remains unknown is what, precisely, that intention is. Our instruments intercepted the energy, but the content remains beyond decoding. The waveform is too structured to be natural, too alien to be understood, and too deliberate to be ignored. All we know is this: the transmitter is active, the signal is real, and the device pulses with a consistency that points to a purpose, one that humanity has not been invited to understand. And that brings us to the most unsettling question of all. If R2 Sven installed something on the far side of the Moon, what was it preparing us for? Before December the 2nd, the presence of R2 Sven near the lunar surface had been considered an anomaly. Strange, troubling, difficult to explain, yet still thin enough to fit into the margins of speculation. But as analysts reconstructed its earlier encounters, a new pattern emerged. Sven had been interacting with the moon long before anyone realized it. Its first recorded deviation toward lunar orbit was dismissed as a gravitational coincidence. Its second approach, occurring at an impossible acceleration curve, was labeled as an observational artifact. Its third pass, skimming the boundary between shadow and sunlight, triggered concern but was still rationalized as a byproduct of its damaged trajectory. Only now, in retrospect, did it become clear that every one of these events pointed to the same conclusion. R2 Sven had been mapping the far side of the moon. The object's previous passes revealed a startling consistency. Sven repeatedly approached regions where gravitational slopes allowed stable hovering. It positioned itself near crater rims with unobstructed visibility of subsurface cavities. It maintained altitude profiles inconsistent with ballistic motion. These were not the movements of a body drifting under the influence of celestial forces. They were the movements of a system choosing where to look, where to measure, and where to return. And as astronomers re-examined the telemetry, one detail emerged that changed everything. Sven always approached the same general corridor of the far side, an expanse that offered no geological significance, no mineral interest, no prior anomaly. Unless, of course, Sven was not searching for something beneath the lunar surface. It was preparing a place above it. That realization sharpened into clarity only after the appearance of the device. If Sven had installed something or activated something, then its earlier passes were reconnaissance, precision mapping, alignment, calibration, the kind of preparation required not for exploration but for placement. And the placement had been perfect. The device rests based on triangulation within a region permanently shielded from Earth's atmosphere, radio noise and direct optical surveillance. It is the most secluded point accessible without landing deeply underground. And now that point is transmitting. This is where the story truly begins. The confirmation that a device had been installed on the far side of the moon did not trigger shock in the room, not at first. Shock requires an instant of recognition, a moment when the mind catches up with the meaning of what it sees. But when the first decoded telemetry packets appeared on the analyst's screens, there was no moment of recognition. Only a slow, widening silence. A silence that began as confusion, deepened into disbelief, and finally settled into a collective understanding that no one dared to articulate aloud. The device was not only active, it was functioning in a way that suggested it had not merely been placed on the moon, It had been purposefully integrated into the lunar environment. The earliest readings showed a narrow band emission, steady and unwavering, pulsing at intervals so precise that even the instrument struggled to keep up with the timing. Natural processes do not maintain such consistency. Artificial satellites do. Engineered beacons do. Systems designed to operate autonomously in hostile environments do. And yet what appeared on the screen did not resemble any terrestrial technology. Its modulation depth fluctuated in patterns that did not match binary encoding, phase shift keying, or any known digital protocol. Instead, the waveform carried layered harmonics oscillating signatures stacked upon one another in a configuration that suggested not simplicity, but hierarchy. One layer maintained a base frequency, another shifted in periodic sweeps, a third pulsed irregularly as though responding to external stimuli. This was not a single message, it was a system. When analysts filtered out the background interference and isolated the primary harmonic, they discovered something even more unsettling. The energy signature did not match solar reflection, cosmic radiation, thermal noise, or the residual scatter produced by lunar dust. It matched an emission source active, controlled, and sustained. The power level was low, but its stability was unnatural. There was no drift, no decay, no deviation. For a device exposed to extreme cold, radiation, micrometeorite impacts, and total darkness, such stability should be impossible without maintenance. Yet the device remained steady, as though shielded by technology not native to the solar system. But it was the signal's direction that shifted the mood from analytical tension to quiet dread. After reconstructing the waveform, the team realized the device was transmitting away from Earth. Not toward Earth's orbit, not towards any of our satellites, but outward into deep space, tracing a vector that matched with disturbing accuracy the outbound trajectories of both R2 Sven and 3I Atlas. 3 signals, 3 corridors, 1 direction. The implication was unmistakable. The device was not designed to communicate with us. It was designed to communicate with them. Once that became clear, the question shifted from what the device was to why it had been placed there. Several hypotheses emerged, each more unsettling than the last. The first suggested that the device functioned as a relay and intermediary station, designed to amplify or refine transmissions that could not be sent directly from within the gravitational interference of the inner solar system. This would mean that Sven's earlier emissions were intentionally incomplete, awaiting a reinforcement node positioned at the optimal angle to boost outbound communication. The second hypothesis suggested surveillance. The far side of the moon, is the quietest radio environment accessible within our system, shielded from Earth's electromagnetic noise. A device placed there would be able to monitor everything without interference: our satellite signals, our radar sweeps, our atmospheric leakage, even the faint hum of our electricity grid reflected off the ionosphere. To an intelligence seeking to measure the development or threat potential of a civilization, such a location would be ideal for long-term observation. But the third hypothesis overshadowed the others because it did not merely suggest observation. It suggested coordination. The device's multi-layered signal structure resembled the early phases of a handshake protocol, the kind used in complex communication systems where multiple entities synchronize before exchanging information. It looked not like a message being sent outward, but a foundation being laid for messages yet to come, messages that required a stable, anchored point within the system, a foothold, a presence, a node. And as the room absorbed this, one final detail emerged that froze every analyst in place. The rhythmic pattern at the base of the signal, the foundational pulse underlying all other harmonics, matched with near-perfect precision the earliest transmissions emitted by R2 Sven months ago, long before it ever approached the moon. The device was speaking the same language. It was part of the same network, and that meant R2 Sven had not merely visited the moon, it had installed a member of its own system. Whatever that system's purpose may be, one thing is already certain: the moon is no longer silent. The first attempts to analyze the energy signature coming from the device on the far side of the moon produced a result so unexpected that the initial reaction from the telemetry team was laughter short, nervous, involuntary. It wasn't amusement, it was disbelief. The kind of disbelief that arises when data contradicts not just theory, but intuition, experience, and every technical framework humanity relies on to interpret the physical world. The energy waveform was wrong, too stable to be natural, too complex to be simple transmission, too structured to be noise, yet too alien to resemble any known form of communication. It behaved like a message, but did not pattern like a message. It pulsed with intention, but encoded nothing we could pass. It was neither digital nor analog. It was something in between, something layered, adaptive, and, above all, active. Energy in science is supposed to behave in predictable ways. Sources weaken with distance, signals decay, waveforms drift. Thermal gradients disrupt frequencies. Interference distorts shape. But the emission coming from the device ignored these rules entirely. The amplitude held steady. The frequency modulation did not drift even under radiation exposure. The thermal noise contributed nothing to its instability because there was no instability. The emission behaved as though it were self-correcting, adjusting continuously to maintain a perfect signal shape, despite the harsh conditions of the lunar environment. This idea alone was alarming because self-correction implies feedback. Feedback implies sensors, and sensors imply awareness not of us, but of its own operational parameters. The next anomaly emerged when analysts attempted to map the energy distribution across the spectrum. Instead of concentrating around a central frequency, the emission appeared to cascade across multiple bands, low-frequency sweeps, mid-frequency pulses, high-frequency spikes, all synchronized through an underlying harmonic template. Natural systems do not organize themselves this way. Primitive transmitters cannot achieve this complexity. Even advanced terrestrial systems struggle to maintain multi-band coherence across such wide spectral ranges. But the device did so effortlessly, as though the concept of frequency constraints simply did not apply. Then came the most unsettling detail. When researchers plotted the energy waveform across time, they discovered that the signal was not constant. It breathed. Not in a random pattern, not in reaction to solar conditions, but in a steady, repeating cycle one that matched almost exactly the rotation period of the moon relative to distant star fields. The device was syncing itself not to Earth, not to the sun, but to the sky, to the position of the stars. It was aligning its emission pattern to a celestial reference frame that only an interstellar traveler would need. A beacon does not behave this way. A passive relay does not behave this way. Only a system designed to communicate across vast distances, across interstellar distances, would anchor itself to the stars. And this led to an even darker realization. The energy signature did not resemble transmission. It resembled preparation. The device was not sending a message. It was establishing a channel, a stable, calibrated, star-locked channel capable of receiving or transmitting information with precision that terrestrial systems could not match. It was building a link one that could persist unchanged for years, decades, perhaps centuries. A link that did not care about human presence, human detection, or human interpretation. A link that existed for a recipient far beyond our world. But what drove the fear deeper was the device's directional behavior. When analysts isolated the highest frequency spikes, they found a faint but unmistakable beam pattern, thin, razor-sharp, pointed not at random, but toward the same distant corridor that 3i Atlas and R2 Sven had used for their outbound transmissions. The far side of the moon was chosen not for concealment from Earth, but for geometry, for efficiency, for direct line of sight to whatever intelligence lies in that distant darkness. More troubling still, the energy profile showed fluctuations that did not resemble output. They resembled response preparation. The device was optimizing its sensitivity, adjusting its spectral windows, tuning itself as though awaiting a reply, and that single detail transformed the interpretation entirely. This was not a one-way broadcast. This was a station waiting for the next part of a conversation. By the time the full analysis was presented to the Scientific Council, one conclusion loomed over all others with suffocating clarity. The device is not a transmitter, it is an anchor, a node, a terminal for something yet to come, and if it is waiting, then something else may soon be speaking. As the data poured in and the first stable reconstructions of the lunar device's emission pattern were completed, the Scientific Council entered a phase of analysis that could best be described as triage, an urgent sorting of possibilities, arranged not by likelihood but by the severity of the consequences each implied. The device's behavior was too unnatural to be dismissed, too consistent to be accidental, too sophisticated to be misunderstood. Yet the question of what it was remained inaccessible, and when pressed to formulate working hypotheses, the researchers found themselves narrowing the interpretation to 3 primary possibilities, each more deeply unsettling than the last. The first hypothesis emerged quickly. The device was a beacon. In its simplest form, a beacon is a marker, a point of reference used by a traveling intelligence to locate, measure, or return to a specific position. The far side of the moon, shielded from Earth's electromagnetic interference and offering a stable geometric anchor point relative to both the Sun and distant star fields, would be an ideal location for such a marker. A beacon is not a message, it is a presence, a way of saying, here, this location is important. If this interpretation was correct, then R2 Sven had not merely visited the moon, it had established a fixed coordinate in space, a kind of interstellar waypoint, and this alone was enough to raise the terrifying possibility that the moon is now part of a larger navigation network, one we did not build, do not understand, and cannot disable. But the second hypothesis was worse. The device was a relay. Unlike a beacon, a relay is not passive. It amplifies, redirects, and sometimes reformats signals sent from or to distant sources. The multi-layered harmonic structure detected in the energy signature, capable of maintaining coherence across multiple frequencies, suggested a level of sophistication consistent with long-range communication systems. More critically, the signal aligned with the known outbound vector of R2 Sven and 3I Atlas. This meant the device was not merely marking a place, it was part of an operational chain. It might be receiving signals from deep space, strengthening them, reshaping them, and preparing to transmit them beyond the moon-shadowed horizon. In this scenario, the device becomes a gateway, a bridge linking our solar system to whatever lies in that distant corridor of darkness. Yet even this explanation failed to account for the full set of anomalies. The waveform contained adaptive elements patterns that shifted in response to environmental changes, as though the device was constantly recalibrating. Relays do not typically behave this way. They do not prepare for conditions that have not yet occurred. They do not synchronize with celestial coordinates. They do not wait. There was something anticipatory in the device's signature and energy that seemed to reflect readiness, not activity. And that is what led to the third hypothesis, the most chilling of them all. The device was an observational node, not a beacon, not a relay, a sensor, a watcher, a mechanism designed to monitor Earth in ways our technology cannot match. From the far side of the moon, a device could observe without obstruction or interference. It could track electromagnetic emissions, gravitational fluctuations, ionospheric changes, satellite trajectories, rocket launches, orbital debris patterns, weather signatures, thermal output, atmospheric density shifts, and even biological markers carried upward through the upper layers of the atmosphere. Such a system could construct a profile of Earth so detailed that it would reveal not just what our civilization is, but what it is becoming. The idea that the device might be measuring humanity was horrifying, not because of its implications alone, but because of its symmetry with previous events. 3i Atlas scanned our planet with forensic precision before transmitting its findings outward. R2 Sven conducted its own reconnaissance, measuring Earth's technologies, movements, and capabilities. The installation of an observational node would represent the next logical step, a permanent instrument, a long-term monitor, a system that watches not once, not briefly, but continuously. But the greatest horror lay in the fact that all three hypotheses, beacon, relay, sensor, could be true at the same time. A single device could anchor navigation, strengthen communication, and monitor the target environment simultaneously. And if that were the case, then the moon was no longer a passive celestial body. It had become part of an infrastructure one that belonged not to humanity, but to an intelligence that had already demonstrated patience, precision, and the ability to operate without detection. By the end of the session, the council had reached an unspoken consensus. The device was not an experiment. It was not an accident. It was not debris. Whatever its exact function, one truth was inescapable. It was meant to be there, installed deliberately, activated purposefully, aligned perfectly. And now that it had awakened, the only question left was not what it was doing, but what it was preparing for. The moment specialists began examining why the device had been placed specifically on the far side of the moon, the tone of the investigation shifted from analytical to foreboding. It was not just the fact that the far side is permanently hidden from Earth, nor that it is shielded from nearly every form of terrestrial interference. It was the realization that among every accessible location in the entire Earth-Moon system, the far side of the Moon is the single most strategically perfect place for an extraterrestrial intelligence to establish a covert long-term presence. It offers concealment, silence, stability, and advantage for conditions that, when combined, transform the Moon's dark hemisphere from a geographic curiosity into something far more unsettling, an ideal foothold. To understand why, one must consider the geometry first. The Moon is tidally locked, presenting the same face to Earth at all times. This means the far side never rotates into view. It is a permanent blind spot, a region humanity can only observe indirectly through orbiting satellites. From the moment the device was installed, it became effectively invisible to ground-based observation. Every telescope, radar sweep, and atmospheric scanner on Earth remained blind. Only deep space platforms positioned far beyond low lunar orbit could detect its emissions. This gave the device an inherent advantage. It could study Earth without being seen. It could transmit without being detected. It could operate without resistance. Next came the acoustic silence. The far side of the Moon is the quietest radio environment accessible to any civilization within the Earth-Moon system. Earth's electromagnetic noise produced by millions of transmitters, satellites, radars, engines, computers, and power grids never reaches it. For researchers, this silence has always made the far side an attractive location for radio observatories. For an extraterrestrial intelligence, it would be priceless. The device placed there would enjoy an environment free from interference, allowing it to pick up faint cosmic signals, distant transmissions, and subtle atmospheric leakage from Earth. It would detect every nuance of our civilization's electromagnetic footprint with perfect clarity. Then there is the structural stability. Unlike Earth, the Moon has no tectonic activity, no atmosphere, no weather, no erosion, no storms, no oceans, no magnetic storms, and minimal geological movement. A device placed on the far side could operate undisturbed for decades, centuries, or longer. Nothing would bury it, nothing would damage it, and nothing would distort its signal except micrometeorite impacts, which could be compensated for through design. If the intention was to create a permanent monitoring point, no location in the solar system is more stable than the far side of the moon. But the most unsettling factor was not the silence, nor the geometry, nor the stability. It was the vantage point, the perspective the location offers relative to Earth. From the far side, a device can observe Earth indirectly through reflected radiation, thermal emissions, and gravitational fluctuations. These signals bend around the lunar curvature, providing subtle but detectable patterns that encode information about Earth's atmosphere, weather systems, satellite activity, energy consumption, and even surface changes. Combined with its isolation from electromagnetic noise, the far side becomes an unparalleled observational platform for any intelligence seeking to monitor a planet without being detected. It was this triumvirate of concealment, clarity, and stability that caused the room to fall silent when the analysts presented their conclusion. The far side of the moon was not chosen randomly. It was chosen with precision. It was selected by something that understood our limitations, our observational blind spots, our electromagnetic environment, our technological capabilities, and our weaknesses. To install a device there was not simply efficient, it was strategic, purposeful, deliberate. And the final blow came when orbital imagery confirmed that the device had been placed in a crater with a geometry that minimized line-of-sight exposure to any known or planned lunar missions. It was positioned not just away from Earth's view, but away from our future pathways. Whoever placed it understood not only where we are looking now, but where we will look next. It was an installation made with foresight. All of this led to one disturbing conclusion. The device was not meant to be discovered. We intercepted its emission only because one of our deep space probes happened to pass through the precise trajectory that allowed it to detect the faint leakage around the lunar curvature. If the geometry had been slightly different, if the orbit had been shifted by even a few degrees, the device would have remained undetected indefinitely. And this, more than anything else, implied intention, because intention always implies purpose. Now that we know where it is, the question becomes unavoidable. Why place a device in a location designed to hide it from humanity for as long as possible? The deeper the analysts pushed into the signal itself, the more the familiar frameworks of physics and communication theory began to fall apart. The emission coming from the lunar device was not merely unusual. It was constructed in a way that resisted every tool designed to understand patterns, decode information, or classify signals. It obeyed no terrestrial logic. It matched no known method of communication. And yet, for all its alien structure, It carried an unmistakable internal order, an architecture of intention hidden beneath an unfamiliar language. The first indication that the signal was something beyond conventional understanding came from its layering. Ordinary transmissions, whether radio, microwave, optical, or otherwise, contain a single carrier frequency modulated by information. Even complex systems such as military satellites or deep space probes use hierarchical encoding to nest multiple channels within one framework. But the lunar device operated differently. It generated not one signal, but three, each occupying a distinct part of the spectrum and each carrying its own harmonic structure. These three signals intertwined, converging at mathematical intervals that were too precise to be accidental. The lowest frequency band pulsed in long, steady intervals that resembled a baseline clock, a timing architecture, possibly the foundation upon which the entire signal operated. The mid-range band fluctuated more dynamically, as though it were reacting to environmental variables, lunar temperature shifts, cosmic rays, gravitational tides. This suggested adaptive calibration, something a system uses to maintain coherence. But it was the highest band that drew the most attention. Instead of behaving like an information channel, it behaved like a query. It oscillated through patterns with a rhythm that suggested anticipation, as if the device were repeatedly preparing a request, awaiting alignment or readiness in something beyond itself. And then came the modulation anomalies. When analysts stripped away the background noise, they discovered that the signal did not simply modulate in a smooth curve. It stepped, shifting between discrete states with transitions so rapid that no natural oscillator could account for them. These steps were so precise that they resembled computational operations on-off patterns, high-low bursts, phase shifts that mirrored logic gates. It was as if the device contained a system operating on principles entirely foreign to human electronics, yet unmistakably computational in nature. The next observation devoured any lingering hope that this was a malfunction or random artifact. Every time Earth's electromagnetic environment shifted, whether due to solar storms, satellite launches, or atmospheric disturbances, the signal subtly adapted. Not dramatically, not reactively, but intelligently. It adjusted amplitude, shifted harmonics, and recalibrated timing to maintain its coherence. It was as though the device refused to let interference distort its structure. A passive device does not do this. A transmitter does not do this. A machine that is waiting for a response does. But the detail that chilled the analysts the most came from a long-duration observation window when the signal temporarily weakened. For 7 seconds, the amplitude dipped. During that dip, the mid and high-frequency bands collapsed into a single, unmodulated line, flat, silent, dead. And then, just as suddenly, they reformed, snapping back into place with the same layered complexity as before. This behavior looked exactly like a system rebooting, as if the device were running internal diagnostics, adjusting components or reinitializing subsystems. It exhibited self-maintenance, something no terrestrial beacon, no relay, no passive sensor is capable of performing autonomously. As the data accumulated, a grim consensus began to take shape. The device was not broadcasting information. It was awaiting information. Its structure mirrored handshake protocols, those used when two systems prepare to establish a link. In human technology, such protocols involve negotiation, synchronization, validation. But here, the negotiation was incomprehensible, the synchronization was cosmic, and the validation, whatever form it took, was happening against parameters we could not identify. And that led to the most unsettling conclusion of all. The device was preparing for communication, not with Earth, not with our satellites, not with our instruments, but with something else. Something that exists far beyond the moon, far beyond the solar system, following the same interstellar corridor traced by 3-Eye Atlas and R2 Sven. A response is coming, and the lunar device is the instrument designed to receive it. Long before the device on the far side of the moon began transmitting, long before its harmonics stabilized and its layered structure revealed itself as a sophisticated bridge for communication, R2 Sven had been performing maneuvers that seemed, at the time, erratic but harmless strange arcs, sudden dips, brief pauses near crater rims. Now, in retrospect, every one of those movements looks deliberate. Every orientation shift, every deceleration, every near-surface hover was part of a pre-installation survey. R2 Sven wasn't simply studying the moon. It was selecting a site, preparing it, testing its environment with the precision of an intelligence that understood exactly what it needed from the lunar terrain. The first clue that Sven had been scanning the moon emerged from gravitational interferometry. As the object passed near certain regions of the lunar far side, subtle fluctuations in local gravitational gradients were recorded, not because Sven itself created them, but because it was responding to them. Natural bodies drift through gravitational fields without pattern. Sven, in contrast, made course corrections aligned perfectly with changes in lunar density. It scanned subsurface voids, ancient lava tubes, and regions of anomalously low mass concentration. Its behavior resembled a surveyor identifying structural stability. The device needed a location that would not shift, collapse, or distort the signal. Sven found it. The second indication came from thermal mapping. During several near-surface passes, Sven emitted high-frequency pulses that reflected off the moon's regolith. These pulses exposed slight thermal inconsistencies, variations in heat retention that corresponded to different material compositions. Natural scanning instruments perform such analysis automatically. But Sven was not following a passive routine. It adjusted the angle, spacing and strength of each pulse as though testing the reflectivity of the surface for a specific purpose. It was not looking for water, minerals, or ice. It was evaluating the thermal stability required for the device to maintain perfect signal coherence. Then came the electromagnetic anomalies. On multiple occasions, satellites detected faint disturbances in the moon's residual magnetic field disturbances that coincided precisely with Sven's proximity. The moon does not possess a global magnetic field. Only localized patches remain, remnants of ancient volcanic flows. Yet Sven focused on these patches with obsessive precision. It hovered above them, rotated slowly, and emitted test pulses that behaved like calibration signals. It was measuring not the magnetic field itself, but the interference potential. Any terrestrial engineer knows that communication devices placed in magnetically uneven environments require correction systems. Sven was identifying the exact point where interference would be minimal. But the most disturbing clue came from seismic reflection patterns recorded by one of our orbiters. When Sven approached a particular crater later identified as the site of the device, it emitted a pulse that penetrated the lunar surface and generated a faint seismic echo. The echo revealed something unexpected. Beneath the surface lay a region of unusually dense rock, stable and homogeneous, the perfect natural foundation for anchoring a device that requires absolute vibration isolation. Sven had scanned dozens of potential sites. Only this one met the criteria. The sequence became impossible to deny. Sven was not exploring. It was evaluating, screening, selecting. And then, once the ideal site had been found, it returned for the final time, descending into darkness where no telescope on Earth could follow, performing a maneuver so controlled and so precise that analysts described it as surgical. Moments after Sven disappeared into the crater's shadow, the device's signal activated. The timeline aligned perfectly. Sven's scan had concluded. The installation had begun. This realization unraveled any remaining hope that the device was an accident, a malfunction, or a piece of debris. Everything about its placement was optimized. Gravitational stability, thermal consistency, magnetic quiet, seismic rigidity, geometric concealment, and line of sight to deep space. An installation this precise could only be the product of a mission designed long before Sven entered the moon's orbit. But there was one final detail that pushed the entire discovery from unsettling to terrifying. During Sven's last pass before installing the device, it emitted narrowband bursts that matched the foundational pulse later detected in the device's signal. It was as if Sven were imprinting a code, embedding an identifier or transmitting a key that would later allow the device to activate. The two systems spoke the same language long before the device ever powered on. They were not separate instruments. They were components of the same architecture. And now that the device is active, the architecture is unfolding. The moon has been prepared, a node has been planted, and the system behind Sven and Atlas is one step closer to whatever it is building. The first question that arose after the detection of the lunar device's signal was deceptively simple. Why did we see it at all? Given the precision of its placement, the silence of its position on the far side of the moon, and the sophisticated nature of its emissions, there is no reason such a transmission should have been detected by humanity's current level of technology. And yet, against all odds, one of our orbital platforms drifting through a trajectory that provided only a momentary line of sight captured a faint leakage of energy bending around the lunar curvature. That accidental detection triggered a chain of confirmations from 2 additional deep space monitors, each positioned far enough from Earth to peer over the moon's dark horizon. This coincidence, however, collapses upon closer inspection. What appears to be luck is, in reality, geometry. Astronomical geometry, deliberate geometry. The far side of the moon is not merely hidden from Earth, it is hidden by design from every instrument that humanity has placed in low lunar orbit, geostationary orbit, and even near-Earth space. For decades, our satellites have been deployed primarily along predictable trajectories patterns dictated by fuel efficiency, mission requirements, and communication relay constraints. These patterns create a vast blind zone, a region where no Earth-built craft has a stable line of sight, because such a path requires a high, fuel-expensive orbit, rarely used outside of deep space missions. And it was precisely into that blind zone that R2 Sven placed the device. The only reason the signal was detected is because a scientific spacecraft intended for unrelated heliophysics research happened to cross a rare orbital corridor that extended just far enough beyond the moon's limb to catch the emission as it diffracted around the crater walls. If the instrument had been angled a fraction of a degree differently, or if its schedule had been shifted by even a few seconds, the signal would have gone unnoticed. And here lies the first and most disturbing implication. The device was not meant to be detectable by Earth. The only signals that reach us are accidental leakage, byproducts of a system designed to transmit only toward deep space, not toward the planet sitting 384,000 kilometers away. This realization forced researchers to revisit the nature of the signal itself, because what we intercepted was not the primary beam. It was the overspill, the faint scatter that escaped the cylindrical path of the device's outbound transmission. The actual transmission is far more concentrated, far more powerful, and almost certainly contains data far beyond the fragments we managed to scrape from its outer edges. What we captured is equivalent to overhearing a whisper intended for someone standing miles away. But the question remained, why didn't terrestrial telescopes detect anything? Because Earth's atmosphere absorbs, refracts, and distorts a significant portion of the signal bands used by the device. Even ground-based radio telescopes cannot penetrate the radio shadow created by the moon's bulk. And even if they could, the primary beam is not pointed at Earth. It cuts through interstellar space with surgical precision, never scattering downward, never widening its aperture toward our planet. The device was designed to be invisible to us. Only orbiting instruments beyond lunar distance, beyond Earth's electromagnetic halo, have any chance of intercepting it. And even then, only those positioned within incredibly narrow geometric windows. The moon itself acts as a shield, absorbing nearly all of the device's energy on the Earth-facing hemisphere. Humanity was never meant to know it was there. But what pushed the scientific council from unease into dread was this. The device's emissions adjusted after the third detection, not to increase secrecy, not to mask its presence, but to enhance its alignment with deep space, as if optimizing for distance, clarity, or an approaching point of reception. The shift was slight, but unmistakable. A minor tightening of the beam, a recalibration of amplitude, a sharpening of its primary harmonic. This could only mean one thing. The device is actively preparing for a response, not ours. Theirs. 48 hours after the first confirmed detection of the device's emission, the signal underwent a transformation so precise, so deliberate, and so unmistakably intentional that it forced the scientific council to abandon the possibility that the installation was in any way passive. At first the shift was subtle, an almost imperceptible tightening of the primary harmonic, a refinement of the amplitude curve, a narrowing of the upper band oscillations. But within minutes, every analytical instrument monitoring the far side of the moon recorded a synchronized escalation across all three layers of the device's output. The baseline pulse grew stronger, its timing locked into a pattern of mathematical exactness, far beyond the stability of any natural oscillator. The mid-range frequencies, previously drifting in response to environmental conditions, snapped into alignment as if the device had resolved whatever internal calibration it had been performing. And the high-frequency band, which analysts initially interpreted as an anticipatory query, surged into an active state configuration that resembled the early stages of a long-distance handshake protocol. It was not merely emitting, it was preparing. It was transitioning from a dormant operational mode into something that carried the unmistakable architecture of readiness. As the waveform unfolded across the next hour, the device began introducing harmonic structures that had not existed in the earlier emissions. These structures were not random fluctuations or incidental patterns, they were computational in nature, stepping through sequences with the rhythm of a machine verifying its own logic. The energy profile shifted, no longer stabilizing against interference but actively suppressing it, as if the device were reinforcing itself for an incoming transmission of greater complexity than anything it had previously handled. Even more chilling was the appearance of a narrowly focused modulation spike that repeated at intervals not tied to lunar rotation, Earth's position, or any known celestial cycle. Instead, it aligned with the distant starfield region that matched the outbound trajectory of 3I Atlas and R2 Sven. It was as if the device was synchronizing itself with an external timing source, an unseen clock far beyond our solar system, one that dictated when the next phase of its mission must begin. But the most disturbing aspect of the shift emerged when analysts compared the new waveform to the earlier signals transmitted by R2 Sven months before its lunar descent. Hidden within the high-frequency band was a faint resonance, a structural fingerprint identical to the foundational code pattern emitted by Sven. The device was not merely responding to some distant signal or preparing for a future message. It was activating a protocol already embedded within its architecture, a protocol designed to operate only when certain criteria were met. This resonance acted like a key, unlocking a higher operational mode that would remain dormant until the correct moment. And that moment, according to every instrument monitoring the emission, had arrived exactly 48 hours after installation. No delay, no deviation, perfect timing. The scientists realized with a kind of cold, tightening dread that the device had not malfunctioned into activity. It had awakened. Its earlier signal had been a prelude, a low-level broadcast required to stabilize the node and synchronize with deep space. But the new waveform was something entirely different, structured, expanded, energized, a sequence, a message, or worse, an initialization. Whatever the device was designed to receive, process, or transmit, it was no longer in a waiting state. It had entered phase 2. And if the activation required exactly 48 hours, that meant R2 Sven's mission, the placement of the device and the timing of its awakening, had been planned with a precision that defied coincidence or improvisation. It was the execution of a schedule. The moon was no longer holding a silent mechanism. It was hosting a system that had just come online. As the signal evolved into its fully activated state, and the device settled into a mode of operation that no longer resembled a calibration or a warm-up, but something far more decisive. The most unsettling hypothesis among the scientific council began to surface with increasing weight. The possibility that the lunar installation was not a sensor, nor a relay, nor a passive observational instrument, but a beacon, a cosmic marker calibrated not for communication with humanity, but for guiding, summoning, or orienting something far beyond our system. Unlike terrestrial beacons, which rely on simple repetitive signals used for navigation or identification, this device projected an emissions architecture so advanced and so meticulously synchronized with interstellar geometry that even the act of calling it a beacon felt like an understatement. It was not merely broadcasting its existence. It was anchoring itself to a vast celestial coordinate system, tying the moon's position into a much larger framework of spatial reference, one that no human mission has ever detected, decoded, or understood. The key to this interpretation lay in the alignment. When analysts plotted the directionality of the device's primary emission, they discovered a beam pointed with almost impossible accuracy toward the same distant region of space associated with both 3i Atlas and R2 Sven. This region has no known pulsars, no detectable nebulae, no radio sources, no exoplanet signatures bright enough to justify such precision. It is to our instruments an empty corridor, and yet both extraterrestrial probes departed along this vector, both transmitted in this direction, and now the lunar device has oriented itself toward the exact same line. That level of alignment cannot be accidental. It implies destination. It implies purpose. It implies the existence of a receiving system, an intelligence or infrastructure positioned so far away that only the most precisely calibrated signals could ever reach it. More disturbing still was the realization that the device's emission pattern did not behave like a one-way transmission. Its layered harmonics and timing sequences resembled the handshake protocols used to establish long-range communication between distant systems. Except here, the handshake was incomplete, as though the node were waiting for the next step of a process. This suggested that the device was not simply broadcasting its position. It was positioning itself within a larger network. In human terms, it was registering itself a cosmic equivalent of activating a transponder. And once registered, once its position and identity were locked into place, the system to which it belonged would know exactly where the moon is, exactly where Earth is, and exactly where our solar system sits along the galactic arm. The implications were staggering. A beacon serves one of two purposes. It either draws something in, or it marks something for later retrieval. The former implies imminent arrival. The latter implies long-term coordination. Neither possibility is comforting. If the device is summoning, then something may already be accelerating toward our solar system along the Atlas-Sven corridor. And if the device is marking, then Earth may have been catalogued as part of a larger inventory one that spans systems and epochs, maintained by an intelligence far older and more methodical than our own. That interpretation gained further traction when analysts detected faint secondary oscillations hidden beneath the main emission. These oscillations match the drift signatures of a signal compensating for extreme distance, suggesting the device was preparing for communication over light years, not astronomical units. Only a system expecting a response from a distant point would embed such corrections. It meant the device was not calling to something nearby. It was calling to something far away. Something that needed time to receive, time to decode, and time to act. This led researchers to the darkest question of all. If R2 Sven placed a beacon on our moon, then what was the intention behind marking Earth with a precision designed for interstellar navigation? Was it an invitation, a warning, a reference, or a claim? Was the moon chosen because it offers perfect geometric isolation, or because it is the closest stable platform to Earth that can be used without interference? And if this device is part of a cycle, if 3i Atlas and R2 Sven were sent not as isolated probes but as sequential agents, then what cycle are we now part of? A cycle of exploration, a cycle of evaluation, or a cycle of acquisition? Whatever the answer may be, the presence of the beacon leaves no room for denial. The moon is no longer just a satellite. It is now a node in an extraterrestrial network. And the system that placed a beacon there has already proven that it operates without hesitation, without error, and without any regard for human awareness. If the beacon hypothesis was disturbing, the second major interpretation of the device's purpose, its potential function as a relay, a deep space transmission enhancer, unfolded into an even more chilling possibility, because it implied not merely identification or marking, but active participation in a communication chain that extends far beyond our solar system. Unlike a beacon, which simply announces location or status, a relay is a component of a much larger structure, a link in a network designed to transmit, strengthen, or reshape information across astronomical distances. And the device's behavior, when examined through this lens, fits the profile with a precision that left the scientific council deeply unsettled. The most compelling evidence for the relay hypothesis came from the signal's multi-layered harmonic architecture, which behaved as though the device were capable of sorting, compressing and reformatting data before transmitting it outward. Such behavior is unheard of in natural phenomena. Even human-built systems struggle to maintain coherence across multiple frequency bands simultaneously, especially in the presence of radiation, cold and micrometeorite bombardment. Yet the lunar device not only maintained its structure but actively compensated for distortions, adjusting its energy output, refining its frequency spacing and optimizing its emission timing. These adjustments matched exactly the kinds of corrections a relay system performs when strengthening or cleaning a signal originating from a distant point. Then came the discovery that altered the entire tone of the investigation. The device's high-frequency band contained echoes, faint, delayed peaks that did not match its primary transmission pattern. These echoes were not reflections from lunar terrain, Earth's magnetosphere, or solar interference. They were internal reflections, feedback signatures produced when a system receives a signal, processes it, and prepares it for retransmission. In other words, the device had already received something faint, something distant, something the node had captured, analyzed, and embedded into its emission. And although the content of that distant signal remains beyond our ability to decode, its presence suggests that the device is not merely calling outward, it is responding. The implications were devastating. If the device is acting as a relay, then the information it processes is not local. It did not originate on the moon. It did not originate near Earth. It may not have originated within the solar system at all. Instead, the node may be synchronizing with an extraterrestrial system positioned so far away that only a relay placed at precise intervals across multiple star systems could maintain communication. This would mean that R2 Sven did not simply install a device. It completed a link in a chain already stretching across the galaxy. And Earth, without consent or awareness, has become part of that chain. The directional analysis reinforced this dread. The device's primary emission aligns perfectly with the outbound corridor used by 3i Atlas and R2 Sven. This corridor is not random, it is not gravitationally efficient, it does not correspond to any known stellar destination of interest. Its path is specific, linear, unwavering. It is as if every probe sent into our system follows a predetermined route, one established long before humanity even existed. The moon, positioned along this vector, becomes an ideal midpoint, a perfect location to capture incoming data and push it onward with enhanced clarity and power. More unsettling still was the device's energy signature during its activation phase. As it transitioned into its fully operational state, the emission amplitude rose in patterns that matched the behavior of a system adjusting its transmission strength based on signal distance, something terrestrial deep space networks do when communicating with probes near the Kuiper Belt or beyond. But here, the adjustments were too broad, too multi-layered, suggesting the device was preparing not for a single destination, but for multiple potential recipients. It was behaving like a router, not a transmitter. This interpretation led to a conclusion few in the council dared to voice. Earth may now be sitting beneath an extraterrestrial communication highway, not the destination, not the origin, but a junction, a place where information passes through, where signals converge and diverge, where the moon functions not as a host planet, but as a logical node in a system of scale beyond human comprehension. The thought that our solar system could be one of countless stops along a route used by an intelligence millions of years older than our civilization was overwhelming. Yet it explained everything: the precise placement, the calibration routines, the layered harmonics, the adaptive signaling, the alignment with the outbound vector. The device was not calling home. The device was connecting home. And if Earth is now part of their network, the next logical question is not what the device will transmit next, but what will come through it. The third hypothesis, the one that experts avoided until all other interpretations had been exhausted, was also the most disturbing. The possibility that the device was not sending information outward at all, nor serving as a passive waypoint in some interstellar communication grid, but functioning as a planetary monitoring system, a mechanism designed to observe Earth continuously, silently, and with a level of precision that surpasses anything humanity has ever built. In this scenario, the device is not primarily concerned with deep space. It is concerned with us. And the evidence supporting this interpretation accumulated with a quiet, suffocating inevitability. The key clue came from the device's low-frequency modulation band, a band previously dismissed as structural noise until analysts realized the modulation patterns mirrored fluctuations in Earth's electromagnetic environment. Each time Earth's ionosphere shifted in response to solar storms, the device's baseline harmonic adjusted in lockstep. Each time a major radio burst originated from human infrastructure long-range radars, satellite constellations, power grid surges, the device's lower band widened, compensating for the change. It was not ignoring Earth. It was adapting to Earth. It was calibrating itself against the planet's electromagnetic heartbeat, synchronizing its detection system so that it could extract data with maximum clarity. Next came the mid-frequency band, the most dynamic portion of the signal. When analysts plotted the band's amplitude over time, they discovered a terrifying correlation. The device's output shifted in direct response to orbital congestion. The movement of satellites across the far-side horizon, as constellations like Starlink, Galileo, Beidou, and classified military networks passed into the moon-shadowed hemisphere. The device introduced compensatory oscillations as though filtering each object individually. It wasn't just scanning Earth's atmospheric emissions, it was tracking our space traffic, identifying each satellite by its unique signal signature, filtering background noise, and isolating transmissions across multiple geostationary arcs. But the deepest alarm came when analysts realized the device was detecting not only signals coming from Earth, but signals reflecting off Earth. The far side of the moon, despite being hidden from direct electromagnetic exposure, is bathed in faint scatter fields produced by Earth's radio emissions bouncing off the ionosphere. These fields contain astonishing detail: atmospheric density, weather patterns, thermal gradients, lightning distribution, even the faint electromagnetic traces of human infrastructure. The device was absorbing this information, amplifying it within its internal architecture, and converting it into a structured pattern within the low and mid-frequency channels. In other words, the device was building a portrait of Earth, a portrait not of geography or climate, but of civilization. It was measuring satellite launch frequencies, radar sweeps, aviation corridors, power grid fluctuations, communication networks, orbital debris patterns, rocket propulsion signatures, military transmission bursts, ionospheric disturbances caused by human technology, atmospheric chemical changes from industrial output. This was not an environmental study. It was not a scientific experiment. It was not an observational curiosity. It was surveillance. The most horrifying evidence came from the signal's high-frequency band, which until this point had been interpreted as a deep space handshake protocol. But after cross-analysis with Earth-based signal bursts, analysts found something unmistakable. Micro-oscillations in the high band were mirroring the timing of Earth's global communication pulses. The synchronized flicker of billions of devices connecting and disconnecting from networks across continents. The device wasn't waiting for a message. It was listening to one. Ours. This revelation transformed the nature of the investigation. For weeks, researchers had been focused on the outbound vector, the alignment with R2 Sven and 3i Atlas, the device's calibration toward deep space. But now a darker truth took shape. The device could serve multiple functions simultaneously. It could be a beacon, it could be a relay, and it could be a surveillance instrument tracking Earth's progress, its instability, its technological trajectory, its electromagnetic presence, its global pulse. This interpretation gained further weight when analysts realized that the device's layered architecture allowed it to process different information streams in parallel. One band monitored deep space, another tracked Earth, a third synchronized with R2 Sven's structural signature. It was a trimodal system capable of evaluation, communication, and observation all at once. And when the scientists considered what intelligent species might want with such a system, the conclusion was no longer just unsettling, it was existential. The device was not studying Earth because Earth is unique. It was studying Earth because Earth is changing. A civilization emitting electromagnetic noise into space at an accelerating pace. A species altering its planet's chemistry within a single century. A world filling its orbit with thousands of artificial objects, a biosphere undergoing rapid technological transformation. To an intelligence that has monitored worlds for millennia, such behavior would not go unnoticed. It would trigger review, assessment, classification. And on December 2nd, 2025, with the activation of the lunar device, Earth entered the next phase of that classification. As the final patterns of the lunar device's emission were decoded, its adaptive low-band monitoring, its mid-band filtration of orbital traffic, its high-band synchronization with distant star fields, a darker and far more consequential interpretation emerged, one that many members of the Scientific Council refused to articulate until the evidence grew too overwhelming to ignore. The device was not simply observing. It was not simply relaying. It was not simply identifying the moon as a node within some vast interstellar network. A fourth possibility existed, one that recontextualized every maneuver R2 Sven performed, every anomaly recorded by our satellites, every alignment traced to the outbound vector shared by 3i Atlas. The lunar installation may not be a communication instrument at all. It may be a trigger mechanism designed to activate only after specific conditions on Earth or within the solar system had been met, initiating a sequence that is neither observational nor exploratory, but preparatory. The first indication supporting this hypothesis came from the device's activation delay. When Sven installed the object on the far side of the moon, it did not power on instantly. It waited. It remained dormant for exactly 48 hours, no more, no less, before shifting into its fully operational mode. This delay was too precise, too calculated, too synchronized to any natural environmental cycle. It resembled the behavior of a device configured to activate at a predetermined time or in response to a particular signal. And when analysts searched for a trigger event during those 48 hours, they found a faint, barely detectable pattern. A subtle fluctuation in the background harmonic of the high-frequency band emitted by the device itself, matching the structural signature of R2 Sven's last transmission before disappearing behind the moon. It was as if the device had been locked, awaiting a final key and authorization code embedded within Sven's final pulse. The second clue came from the waveform's escalation sequence. Once activated, the device expanded its harmonic structure in stages, each stage corresponding to a different operational layer. The first stage aligned the device to the lunar terrain. The second synchronized it with Earth's atmospheric scatter. The third connected it to the deep space corridor shared by Atlas and Sven. And the fourth, the most disturbing of all, involved a new emission that did not point outward, did not point toward Earth, did not match any known starfield alignment, but instead radiated into a region of empty space near the outer edge of the moon's shadow. This emission was brief, faint, and unlike the other structured bands. It resembled a ping, a signal intended to elicit a response from something not currently in view. But the most damning evidence came from the device's internal modulation collapse observed during a 12-second anomaly recorded by the orbital monitors. For 12 seconds, all three harmonic layers folded into a single, flat-spectrum burst, a phenomenon that analysts described as a reset wave. When the harmonics reformed, their patterns were subtly altered. This kind of behavior is characteristic of a device entering a new phase of its mission. It was not malfunction, it was transition. The device was shifting to a state of readiness, as though awaiting the next step in a sequence predetermined long before it arrived on the moon. This raised a terrifying possibility. The device may be waiting for a return signal, a confirmation from the intelligence that sent Sven and Atlas, an instruction to move to the next operational stage. If this is the case, then humanity is witnessing only the prelude. The device's true function may remain dormant until it receives a signal from a source too distant for us to detect, or too subtle for our instruments to interpret. The idea that the installation is part of a multi-phase process, one that activates slowly, methodically, with steps spaced across days or even years, casts its presence in a far more ominous light. This is not a standalone mechanism. It is a component, a cog in a system that has yet to reveal itself fully. Even more disturbing is the possibility that the device is not waiting for a message from deep space, but for a condition on Earth. A spike in our electromagnetic output, a threshold in our satellite density, a shift in atmospheric chemistry, a launch event, a technological milestone. Systems built to observe emerging civilizations may employ triggers not based on time, but on progress signals that indicate a species has crossed a certain developmental boundary. If the device is configured to respond to one of these thresholds, then its next phase will begin only when humanity changes something fundamental about its world. But the darkest interpretation, the one that no one wanted to admit aloud, is that the device might be the final component in a chain of reconnaissance that started long before our detection capabilities matured. 3-Eye Atlas scanned Earth from afar. Sven performed targeted measurements and installed the device. The lunar node activated, synchronized and calibrated itself, and now everything is in place. The trigger is set. The system is complete. All it awaits is the next signal, whether from deep space or from Earth itself. Whatever that signal is, when it arrives, the device will not hesitate. Its purpose will unfold exactly as designed, and humanity will no longer be observing the system. We will be inside it. In the days that followed the activation of the lunar device, the surface calm of our world stood in sharp contrast to the silent crisis unfolding within the Scientific Council. Governments continued operating as though nothing had changed. Cities pulsed with their usual rhythms. Satellites crossed the night sky in predictable arcs. And yet, behind closed doors in dimly lit conference rooms, in classified briefings, in quiet exchanges between researchers who could no longer look at the moon the same way, a single truth emerged with a clarity that none of them could soften or rationalize. Something had been installed on our nearest celestial companion, something not built by human hands, something designed not to explore, not to observe, not to communicate with us, but to serve as a component within a system operating far beyond our understanding. And now that component had awakened. The scientific data painted a picture too precise to dismiss as coincidence. R2 Sven's maneuvers were methodical. The installation site was optimized with impossible foresight. The activation delay was deliberate. The calibration sequence was purposeful. The alignment with the Atlas Sven trajectory was exact. The device's adaptive architecture, multi-band structure, and self-correcting harmonics all pointed toward a system of unimaginable sophistication, one capable of maintaining coherence across interstellar distances, one built to operate autonomously for decades or centuries, one designed to listen, to synchronize, and ultimately to respond. The realization that Earth may not be the target but merely a participant settled over the Council like a physical weight. Because if the device is a trigger, a relay, a beacon, or a surveillance node, its purpose is not rooted in the past. It is not a relic of a prior mission. It is a mechanism preparing for what comes next. And what comes next is no longer speculation, it is inevitability. The lunar node is not asking for permission, acknowledgement, or understanding. It is simply executing its function. Somewhere across the void, the intelligence that deployed Atlas and Sven is receiving data, evaluating conditions, updating frameworks. The chain has not ended. It has only begun. In the absence of clear intent, the Council turned to probabilities. None offered comfort. If the lunar device is a planetary monitor, then Earth's technological evolution may now be under direct evaluation. If it is a relay, then signals from distant systems may soon pass through our moon, transforming it into a silent cornerstone of a network older and larger than humanity. If it is a beacon, then the route to our solar system has now been marked permanently, and if it is a trigger, then its activation is only the first step in a sequence that could reshape everything we understand about our place in the cosmos. Yet the most unsettling thought came from an unexpected source, not data, not analysis, not physics, but psychology. For the first time in history, humanity is confronted with the possibility that we are not merely being watched, but incorporated. Our world, once isolated by ignorance and distance, has been folded into a structure operating across scales we cannot measure. A structure defined by intention, precision, and purpose. A structure built not for us, but around us. The moon, ancient symbol of mystery and wonder, is now part of a mechanism whose next motion may arrive without warning, without negotiation, without regard for the species observing it. And so Earth waits. Not because waiting is wise, but because waiting is the only option. There is no protocol for this, no precedent, no defense, no dialogue. Only the slow, suffocating understanding that the lunar device is not a beginning or an end, but a transition, a threshold, a silent pivot point between the era where humanity believed it was alone and the era where it can no longer sustain that illusion. The question is no longer whether we are observed. That question has been answered. The question now is when the next signal will arrive, when the next change in the device's pattern will occur, when the next probe, object, or emissary will cross into our sky, following the same vector traced by Atlas and Sven. For now, the moon remains silent to human ears, but to the intelligence that placed the device there, silence is not emptiness. Silence is readiness. And one day, perhaps soon, perhaps centuries from now, the system that now includes our moon will no longer be quiet. When that moment comes, humanity will understand not what the device is, but what it has always been preparing for. In the weeks that followed the realization that the lunar device had fully integrated itself into an extraterrestrial network, The psychological landscape across the global scientific community began to shift in ways that no formal statement or public announcement could ever capture. Laboratories remained illuminated deep into the night, screens filled with oscillating waveforms, spectral graphs, and endlessly recalculated models that refused to converge into any scenario offering comfort. Observatories redirected their instruments toward the moon, not in expectation of visual confirmation, because they knew no camera, no telescope, no earthbound instrument could see the device, but simply because the act of watching felt necessary, a futile but instinctive attempt to regain some sense of observational control over an event that had unfolded entirely outside humanity's influence. Yet the moon revealed nothing. It hung in the sky with its familiar pale indifference, its softly illuminated surface betraying no sign of the installation hidden in eternal darkness just beyond the horizon. The silence was not reassuring. It was accusatory, confrontational, a reminder that something now lived on its far side that did not belong to us. Behind the scenes, researchers began revisiting every oddity, every anomaly, every unexplainable reading collected over the past decade, searching for patterns that might retroactively hint at prior phases of this interstellar sequence. The deeper they dug, the more they realized how blind humanity had been. Minor spikes in deep space noise floors dismissed as instrument error now seemed suspiciously aligned with the arrival trajectories of Atlas and Sven. Strange fluctuations in lunar gravitational mapping, previously written off as sensor drift, now appeared to correlate with Sven's early passes. Even tiny irregularities in radio quiet zones areas once thought to be free from interference took on new meaning when considered alongside the device's eventual activation. It was as though the entire chain of events leading to December 2nd had been unfolding quietly, subtly, beneath our awareness, slipping seamlessly through the cracks of human perception because we were incapable of recognizing their intent without the context we now possessed. Governments, of course, responded with the predictable cocktail of denial, secrecy, and poorly disguised urgency. Emergency committees were formed with names that sounded like bureaucratic fictions: Lunar Phenomena Working Group, Extraterrestrial Signal Coordination Task Force, Deep Space Monitoring Integration Division. The language was clinical, sanitized, carefully filtered to mask the sheer magnitude of what humanity was facing. But the people inside those rooms were not fooled by the acronyms or the professional tone. They understood with suffocating clarity that the device was not an isolated anomaly. It was the manifestation of an intelligence whose scale dwarfed all terrestrial assumptions. And the very fact that this intelligence operated with such precision, efficiency, and silence suggested that its goals lay far beyond anything humans could negotiate with, bargain with, or comprehend. This understanding began to produce a subtle cultural disturbance, an undercurrent of paranoia, an existential dread that spread through scientific channels long before the public caught even the faintest whisper of concern. Researchers found themselves waking in the middle of the night, not to the sound of alarms, but to the thought of the device's harmonic signature aligning with distant points in the cosmos. They imagined the incoming reply, not as a beam of energy, but as an idea, a structure, a framework, a decision that had been forming in the shadows of an intelligence far older than the solar system itself. They imagined what humanity might represent in the eyes of such an intelligence, a data point, a classification, a variable in a cosmic model whose boundaries we lack the capacity to perceive. The more they imagined, the more they realized something profoundly unsettling. Nothing in the device's behavior indicated fear, caution, or uncertainty. It did not analyze the moon timidly, did not hesitate during placement, did not vary its emissions as though unsure of interference. It behaved with the confidence of a system that had done this countless times before, installing nodes, activating them, integrating them into communication chains spanning incomprehensible distances. That kind of confidence can only come from understanding of the environment, understanding of the process, understanding of what comes next. This realization drove several analysts to a disturbing line of inquiry. If the device is part of a larger network, how many other systems across the galaxy are similarly equipped? How many worlds? How many moons? How many silent celestial bodies host similar nodes, each waiting for signals that pass through interstellar corridors like veins carrying information through the body of some vast ancient machine? Are these devices endpoints, or are they merely waypoints, markers guiding probes or ships or other mechanisms along predetermined routes? What if our moon is not unique, not special, not even significant? What if it is simply next in a sequence so old and so large that our discovery of the device is equivalent to noticing a single cell in a vast organism? The implications of such a system were staggering. If the network spans multiple star systems, then the intelligence behind it may not be centralized in any physical location. It may exist as a distributed consciousness, a collective computational fabric that processes data globally, evaluating worlds not through direct interaction, but through the silent accumulation of information gathered by thousands of such nodes. In this model, R2 Sven and 3i Atlas were not emissaries of a singular civilization, but instruments deployed across time and distance, each programmed to collect, install, and move on. They were not scouts. They were not explorers. They were components in a system whose function is valuation. And what then is Earth's role in such a system? Are we a static variable, observed but irrelevant? Are we a dynamic variable, monitored for signs of instability? Or are we a critical variable, one whose trajectory requires intervention? The Scientific Council debated these possibilities with increasing intensity, but every argument collapsed beneath the same fundamental truth. The device was not designed to answer questions for humanity. It was designed to answer questions about humanity for someone or something else. This understanding triggered the next wave of fear. The realization that whatever intelligence lies at the end of the Atlas Ven vector already knows vastly more about Earth than we know about them. They know our atmospheric composition, our electromagnetic signature, our technological development, our ecological instability, and our orbital clutter. They know the rhythm of our planet, the pulse of our civilization, the arc of our ascent. They have measurements taken across decades, perhaps centuries. They may have visited before. They may have been watching since long before our species understood the difference between stars and gods. And now, with the installation of the lunar device, that process has entered a new phase. The node is listening. The node is aligned. The node is ready. But ready for what? A reply, a return, an activation, a reassessment. In the absence of answers, astronomers attempted to calculate the potential range and timing of any incoming signal. Their models produced terrifying results. A reply could arrive in days, it could arrive in months, it could arrive in centuries, and when it arrives, humanity may not even recognize it as a reply. It could be a subtle shift in the device's emission, a new harmonic, a brief pulse of energy, or it could be something far more dramatic. A new object entering the solar system along the same vector traced by Atlas and Sven. Whatever form the next phase takes, the timeline is no longer under human control. It is governed by a rhythm written into the architecture of the device, a rhythm synchronized with systems far beyond our reach. Some researchers attempted to find solace in the idea that we may not live to see the consequences. Others found the idea unbearable, that humanity might drift forward unaware, living out its brief civilization beneath a device that is silently preparing the conditions for something larger. Yet the most disturbing thought came from those who understood the elegance of the system. The next phase may already have begun. It may be unfolding invisibly beyond the sensitivity of our instruments, beyond the awareness of our science, beyond the threshold of human perception. The device may be receiving signals too faint, too complex, or too alien for us to detect. And if that is the case, then the future is no longer approaching. It is already here, not announced, not revealed, not understood, but present quietly, patiently, inevitably, encoded in the harmonics of a lunar signal that continues to pulse across the void, waiting for the moment when its purpose will finally, decisively reveal itself.